Lords, I empathise totally with the noble lady and the Minister, because I too grew up in a council home in Moulscombe, Brighton. It was part of the Homes for Heroes development in 1925, and my parents moved into it probably 25 years later. And the welcome feeling of stability and security and community, and having shops close and having a garden and being able to actually plan for the future, it was amazing. And I still remember it incredibly fondly. So I welcome this bill, because any measure that strengthens social housing, protects tenants and begins to repair decades of neglect is a step in the right direction. For example, the reforms to right to buy are long overdue. The stronger protections for survivors of domestic abuse are important and necessary. And I welcome the government's continued recognition that social housing must be part of the solution to the housing crisis we are in. But while I welcome the bill, it doesn't match the scale of the problem. I'm going to repeat figures that have already been mentioned, but they bear repeating because they are so shocking. We are facing a housing emergency, not in the future, an emergency happening now, already devastating lives across the country. More than 1.3 million households sit on social housing waiting lists. Councils are spending billions of pounds every year on temporary accommodation. Families are raising children in cramped rooms with no security and no stability. And young people, of course, are finding themselves locked out of affordable housing altogether. 1 in 50 Londoners is homeless and living in temporary accommodation. Among children, it's 1 in 21. How have we got to those figures when we live in one of the wealthiest countries, in the wealthiest cities in the world? The government describes this bill as the next step in the housing renewal programme, but the steps are simply too small. The private sector has never built enough houses, and Thatcher's right to buy has cost the taxpayer millions. The government's housing benefit bill has gone up, and as social house building has collapsed to historically low levels, instead of the taxpayer building and owning, the taxpayer now provides a subsidy for private landlords. We need to build council housing that people can be proud to call a home. It's warm in winter, cool in summer, free of damp, and at a reasonable rent. In an age of billionaires, it's big corporations and investors who have driven up the price of homes that they call assets. The housing market is broken, and it's the corporate investors who have broken it. We cannot solve the housing crisis by slowly reducing the rate at which we lose council social housing stock. We have to start providing homes at scale again, both with new homes in the right places and supporting councils to bring back what is already available. I mean, obviously, history shows us that this can be done. After the Second World War, more than 150,000 social homes were built. Every year, councils were supported to build them. Finance was provided. Housing was treated as the essential national infrastructure it should be. And that's the same ambition that we need now. The government's reforms to right to buy are welcome, but they should have happened years ago. I also welcome the bill's provisions relating to survivors of domestic abuse. That principle that victims should not be forced to lose their home because of someone else's abuse is absolutely right. However, I'm concerned that some of these measures might not work in practice. The measures rely heavily on outcomes in a criminal justice system that too often fails victims of domestic abuse. Many survivors never see a conviction. Many survivors don't even see a prosecution. We need to hear from the government what alternative forms of evidence and protection can be used so that survivors are not excluded. And then there's, of course, the question of affordability. A survivor may obtain sole tenancy rights, but what happens if they can't actually meet the rent on a single income? And we must remember that removing a perpetrator from a property does not automatically make a survivor safe. Post-separation abuse is a reality experienced by thousands of women, so they will probably need some support for these tenancy changes. And of course, young people experiencing homelessness, leaving care or escaping unsafe homes need access to social housing. Yet the stock available to them continues to shrink. The reforms in this bill alone will not change that reality. The bill contains worthwhile measures and I will support its progress, obviously offering helpful advice and ideas at the same time. But we shouldn't pretend that it meets the scale of the problem, the housing emergency that faces this country. And what frustrates me most is that the government's actually seen there's a problem, but they're not doing enough to actually fix it. This should have been the bill that launched a new generation of council housing, the bill that committed to new build and the refurbishment of older housing stock at a rate we need. Instead, it feels like an opportunity only half taken. The housing emergency demands urgency and ambition. Millions of people can't afford for us to settle for anything less. I hope that as this bill proceeds through Parliament, the government will listen carefully and find ways to strengthen it, because the country needs more than baby steps to reform a broken system. It needs a social housing revolution, and this government must be braver.